John Wesley Hardin. John Wesley Hardin was the deadliest gunfighter in the Old West, claiming to have killed over 40 men by age 25, most during arguments, gambling disputes, or petty feuds across Texas. But in 1878, he was finally captured and sentenced to 25 years in prison for murder. After serving 17 years, Hardin was released in 1894 and moved to El Paso, where he tried to reinvent himself as a lawyer. But he quickly fell back into drinking and gambling. His temper hadn't changed either, and he began threatening people openly, including John Selman, a lawman and former outlaw. Hardin had been making threats against Selman for weeks, and Selman had enough. On August 19, 1895, Hardin was drinking and playing dice at the Acme Saloon in El Paso. Around 7 p.m., Selman walked in through the back door. Hardin, standing at the bar with his back turned, never saw him coming. Selman raised his revolver and shot Hardin in the back of the head. The bullet exited through his left eye. Hardin died instantly, collapsing to the floor. Selman claimed self-defense, saying Hardin had threatened to kill him, but witnesses said Hardin never saw Selman and never drew his gun. Selman was indicted for murder, but before the trial could proceed, he was killed in a gunfight with a U.S. Marshal, Billy the Kid. By July 1881, Henry McCarty, known as Billy the Kid, had escaped the hangman's noose once, and Sheriff Pat Garrett wasn't about to let it happen again. Billy had killed at least 8 men by age 21 and had become the most wanted outlaw in New Mexico territory. But after Billy's dramatic courthouse escape, killing 2 guards and riding out of town, Garrett's reputation was on the line. The hunt had become personal. On the night of July 14, 1881, Garrett received a tip that Billy was hiding at the ranch of Pete Maxwell in Fort Sumner, New Mexico. Garrett and 2 deputies arrived after dark and entered Maxwell's bedroom to question him. At that moment, Billy walked into the darkened room, unaware that Garrett was inside. He saw shadowy figures and asked in Spanish, "¿Quién es?" "Who is it?" Garrett recognized his voice immediately and fired twice. 1 bullet hit Billy in the chest, just above his heart. He died within minutes. Sheriff Garrett claimed self-defense, but doubts persisted. Some witnesses even said Billy was unarmed. Others believed Garrett had ambushed him in the dark. Belle Starr. By February 1889, Belle Starr had survived longer than most male outlaws, but someone had decided it was time for her to die. One of the few female outlaws in the Wild West, Myra Maybelle Shirley, had ridden with Jesse James, stolen horses across Indian Territory, and harbored fugitives on her Oklahoma ranch. But years of tensions with neighbors, family, and former associates had left her with a list of people who wanted her dead. On February 3, 1889, Belle was riding home alone near Eufaula, Oklahoma, when someone hiding in the brush opened fire. The first shotgun blast hit her in the back, knocking her off her horse. As she tried to crawl away, the shooter fired again, hitting her in the neck and face. Her injuries were fatal, and she died within minutes. The killer was never officially identified, but suspicion fell on several people, including her own son, Edgar Watson, with whom she had been arguing over land and money. Watson was arrested but never charged. Wild Bill Hickok. By August 1876, James Butler Hickok, known as Wild Bill, had survived more gunfights than he could count, but his luck was about to run out. The former lawman and scout was considered nearly impossible to kill in a fair fight. On the afternoon of August 2, 1876, he sat down for a poker game at Nuttall and Mann's Saloon No. 10 in Deadwood, South Dakota. He always preferred to sit with his back to the wall so he could watch the room. But that day, his usual seat was taken. For the first time in his life, Wild Bill reluctantly sat with his back to the door. This was a huge mistake. A drifter named Jack McCall entered the saloon. McCall had lost money to Hickok the previous day, and Hickok had given him money for breakfast, which McCall took as an insult. Shortly after 4 p.m., McCall walked up behind Hickok, drew a revolver, and shot him in the back of the head. The bullet passed through Hickok's skull and lodged in the wrist of another player. Wild Bill collapsed forward, dead instantly. He was holding 2 pairs, black aces and black eights, a hand that became known as the dead man's hand. McCall fled but was quickly captured. At his first trial in Deadwood, he claimed Hickok had killed his brother and was acquitted by a sympathetic jury. But months later, he was retried in a federal court, found guilty, and hanged. Jesse James. By April 1882, Jesse James had pushed his luck too far. After years of bank and train robberies across the Midwest, He had a $10,000 bounty on his head, equivalent to over $300,000 today. Most of his gang was dead or in prison, and Jesse was hiding under the alias Thomas Howard in St. Joseph, Missouri, with only two men he trusted, Charlie and Bob Ford. What Jesse didn't know was that the Ford brothers had already made a deal with Missouri Governor Thomas Crittenden. In exchange for pardons and reward money, they would kill him. On the morning of April 3, 1882, Jesse was in his living room with the Fords planning their next robbery. The house was warm, so he took off his guns and placed them on a bed. He climbed onto a chair to straighten a picture hanging crooked on the wall. Bob Ford saw his chance. He quietly drew his pistol, aimed at the back of Jesse's head, and fired. The bullet struck behind Jesse's right ear, and he fell from the chair, dead before he hit the floor. He was 34 years old. The Ford brothers immediately turned themselves in, claiming the reward. But instead of being celebrated as heroes, they were despised. Newspapers called Bob Ford the dirty little coward who shot Mr. Howard in a song that spread across the country. A jury found him guilty of murder, but the governor pardoned him the same day. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. By 1908, Robert Leroy Parker and Harry Longabaugh, known as Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, were running out of places to hide. After leading their gang Wild Bunch through successful train and bank robberies across the American West, Pinkerton detectives had forced them to flee to South America in 1901. But even in Bolivia, their luck was running out. On November 6, 1908, the two outlaws robbed a payroll courier near the small mining town of San Vicente. A military patrol was sent to track them down. Butch and Sundance took refuge in a small house in San Vicente. Bolivian soldiers surrounded the building and opened fire. A gunfight lasted for hours as the two outlaws returned fire from inside. Sundance was hit multiple times and collapsed. Butch, running low on ammunition, was also struck. According to the most common account, as soldiers prepared to storm the house, two final gunshots were heard from inside. When the soldiers entered at dawn, they found both men dead. It's believed that Butch shot Sundance to end his suffering, then turned the gun on himself. However, rumors persisted for decades that Butch and Sundance had survived and returned to the United States under new identities. Sam Bass. By 1878, Sam Bass had become one of the most wanted men in Texas after his gang robbed trains and stagecoaches across the state. What he didn't know was that the Texas Rangers had placed informants inside his gang, and his time was running out. One of those informants was Jim Murphy, a gang member who had been arrested and agreed to betray Bass in exchange for leniency. On July 19, 1878, Murphy tipped off the Rangers that Bass and his gang were planning to rob a bank in Round Rock, Texas. As Bass and two gang members, Seaborn Barnes and Frank Jackson, walked toward the bank, they stopped at a store to buy supplies. A local lawman noticed they were armed and tried to question them. A gunfight broke out immediately. Barnes was killed, and Bass was shot in the back by a Ranger's bullet that tore through his spine. Gang member Frank Jackson helped Bass onto a horse, and they fled into the countryside. But Bass was dying. Jackson left him under a tree and rode off. Rangers found Bass the next day, still alive but unable to move. He refused to give up the names of his accomplices. He died on July 21, 1878, his 27th birthday. Clay Allison. Clay Allison had survived dozens of gunfights across Texas and New Mexico, building a reputation as one of the most feared and unpredictable gunfighters of the Old West. Known for his violent temper and deadly skill with a pistol, he had killed at least 15 men in gunfights, bar brawls, and personal feuds. But by 1887, Allison had settled down somewhat, running a ranch in Texas and trying to live a quieter life. On July 1, 1887, Allison was transporting supplies in a wagon near Pecos, Texas. As he drove along a rough trail, a sack of grain shifted and fell off the back. Allison stopped, climbed down, and bent over to pick it up. At that moment, the wagon rolled forward. One of the heavy wheels ran over Allison's head, crushing his skull. He died instantly. The man who had survived dozens of gunfights and terrified lawmen across the frontier was killed by his own wagon on a dirt road. His death was so unremarkable that many refused to believe it, insisting he must have been ambushed or murdered. But witnesses confirmed the story. Clay Allison, one of the deadliest gunfighters in the West, was buried in Pecos. His headstone would later read, "He never killed a man that did not need killing." If you liked this video and want me to make more of them, please subscribe and leave a like.